This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty incredible, really. It's about how reading, like actually reading, can shape our brains.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
We've got this research article. It's from Neuroimage, and it digs into the connection between how well we read and, well, the anatomy of our brains.
And it's not just about, being a bookworm or not. What this research is suggesting is that engaging with words, with meaning, can, physically change the structure of our brains.
Yeah, and that's where it gets, I think, really interesting. Fewer people are reading for fun these days. And this study asks, some big questions about what that means for the future.
Yeah.
So could this decline in reading actually have consequences for, how our brains evolve?
Well, the study looked at brain scans, over 1,000 people, and they were comparing good readers to those who struggle, and they found some pretty compelling differences. And these differences were mainly in two areas of the brain: the anterior temporal lobe and Heschl's gyrus.
Heschl's gyrus. That sounds a little intimidating. What part of the brain is that even, and why is it important for reading?
Well, it's part of the auditory cortex. That's the part of the brain that processes sound. And you might be surprised to learn that good readers, they tend to have a thicker left Heschl's gyrus.
Wait, so reading is about hearing. I always thought it was more of a visual thing.
It's both. It's both. Think about when you first learned to read, you sounded out words, you connected letters on the page to sounds.
Right.
And that's called phonological awareness. It's like a key part of reading development.
So that's where Heschl's gyrus comes in. It helps us link those visual symbols to the sounds they represent. But you said a thicker Heschl's gyrus is linked to good reading. Isn't a thicker cortex usually, less efficient?
That's a great question, and it really shows how complex the brain is. It's not always a thicker is better kind of thing. So the left side of our brain, that's where Heschl's gyrus is, it generally has more myelin.
Okay.
Myelin, that's a fatty substance that insulates nerve fibers.
Okay, so like insulation on electrical wires,
Yeah.
helping the signals travel faster.
Exactly. And because of that extra myelin, the left hemisphere's cortical areas, including that auditory cortex, are actually thinner, but they're more spread out. So it's more efficient, even if it's not thicker.
Okay, so it's optimized for speed, which makes sense for processing language.
Right.
But what about that other area, the anterior temporal lobe? The study mentioned that one too, right?
Right, and that's where things get even more interesting. So the anterior temporal lobe is in the left hemisphere as well, and it's like the brain's librarian.
Yeah.
It helps us make meaning from words by connecting all sorts of information, what we see, what we feel, even physical experiences.
Yeah, you mentioned an example, I think it was from the article, about the word leg.
Yes. So to understand the word leg, your anterior temporal lobe, it pulls together everything you know about legs, how they look, how they feel, how they move.
Right.
It's linking visual, sensory concept.
So while Heschl's gyrus is busy connecting the letters and sounds, the anterior temporal lobe is building this rich understanding of what that word actually means.
Exactly. And the study found that people who are good readers, they tend to have a larger anterior temporal lobe, which, it makes sense, right? Like a bigger library, more knowledge.
So it's not just about speed and efficiency in one area. It's also about having that capacity for complex integration in another, like two different but important things happening.
And here's something even more fascinating. This anterior temporal lobe, it's actually one of the thickest structures in the entire cortex. And that thickness, it seems to be really important for handling that complex job of, making meaning from words.
Okay, so we've got this, interesting contrast here. A thinner but more efficient auditory cortex, which is for processing sounds, and then a thicker, more integrative anterior temporal lobe for understanding meaning. It seems like both thickness and efficiency are important for being a good reader. But if our brains are literally wired differently based on how well we read, does that mean we're kind of stuck with whatever reading ability we have?
Well, that's where the good news comes in. Our brains are incredibly adaptable, constantly changing and reshaping themselves throughout our lives based on what we learn, what we practice.
So even if we weren't all born with a super thick Heschl's gyrus or a massive anterior temporal lobe, we can still train our brains to become better readers.
Absolutely. This amazing ability, it's called brain plasticity. It means that every time you pick up a book, every time you challenge yourself with new words and ideas, you're literally physically reshaping your brain.
That's really encouraging. It means reading isn't just a passive activity. It's an active way to shape our own brains. But before we get more into that, let's think about the bigger picture for a minute.
Yeah, let's do that.
If we connect these findings to society as a whole, it raises some, interesting questions. As fewer people make reading a priority, are we risking a decline in our collective capacity for, I don't know, for understanding, for critical thinking? Could this even have implications for how we evolve as a species?
Well, that's a really thought-provoking question. If reading really does shape our brains in such a profound way, what happens when we as a society start reading less?
Yeah, it's a concern. A lot of researchers are looking into this. And some believe that if deep reading declines, it could lead to a decline in certain cognitive skills, things like critical thinking, empathy, the ability to really engage with those complex ideas.
So it's not just about like individual brain power. It's about our ability as like a society
Yeah.
to understand the world and connect with each other like on a deeper level. Exactly. But we can't forget that our brains are amazingly adaptable. Remember brain plasticity?
Right, right.
That means we have the power to actually like shape our own brains through the things we do, the activities we choose.
So even if, like, as a society, we see this shift away from reading,
Yeah.
individuals can still, like, take charge of their own development,
Yeah.
right? Their own cognitive development by making an effort to read regularly.
Exactly. Reading is like it's like a workout for your brain. It strengthens those pathways and enhances cognitive function.
I love that, a brain workout. It makes reading feel less like a chore and more like, something that's empowering.
Right.
But let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about how our brains are being shaped by how we consume information today.
Right.
We're constantly bombarded with digital media, right? Scrolling through
Yeah.
short bursts of text and videos. Is this rewiring our brains in ways we don't even fully understand?
It's a question researchers are really digging into, and there isn't like a simple answer. On the one hand, there's evidence that too much screen time, being exposed to like rapidly changing stimuli, it can impact our attention spans
Right.
and make it harder to focus on, more complex things.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we're always getting these little snippets of information, our brains might get used to that constant stimulation and then find it hard to really focus when we need to.
Yeah, that's one possible outcome. But it's not the whole story, right? Because digital media can also enhance certain cognitive skills. Take video games, for example.
Okay.
Often they're criticized for being addictive, but they've been shown to actually improve things like reaction time, special reasoning, even problem-solving abilities.
Huh. So it's not about demonizing all technology, but more about being aware of how we use it, right? Making sure we're balancing different types of media.
Exactly. And it's important to remember our brains are always adapting to what we ask of them. So by choosing to engage in activities that require focus, critical thinking, deep comprehension, we can train our brains to be more resilient, more adaptable, especially in this world of information that's always changing.
That brings us back to reading then.
Mhm.
Even in this world full of digital content, reading still offers these unique benefits for our brains.
Yeah.
It allows us to explore complex ideas, build our vocabularies, and strengthen those pathways that support, deep thinking and understanding.
And we can't forget the simple pleasure of just getting lost in a good book.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a way to relax, escape, but it can also be so enriching for our minds.
So how do we, reconcile these two things? On one hand, this amazing technology that gives us information instantly. On the other hand, this old practice of reading that takes focus, patience, a willingness to go deep.
I think we can embrace both. It's about finding that balance, being mindful of how we spend our time, making choices that, really support our cognitive well-being.
Okay.
And we can develop habits that let us enjoy the benefits of both the digital world and the world of reading.
That's empowering, isn't it? Means we're not just, at the mercy of technology. We can shape our own brains, our own cognitive destinies.
Yeah, I think so.
But I am curious about something the article mentioned, the impact of this shift in reading habits on, future generations. What skills might they excel in and what might be lost?
That's a question that really sparks debate. Some experts believe that these digital natives, future generations, might develop really enhanced abilities in areas like multitasking, visual processing, that rapid absorption of information. They might be incredibly good at navigating the digital world and putting together information from tons of different sources.
Right, that makes sense. They're growing up surrounded by constant stimulation, information overload, their brains are adapting.
Yeah.
But what about the downsides? What are people worried about?
Well, some worry that things like deep focus, critical thinking, and nuanced comprehension, those might suffer if reading long form stuff becomes less common.
Hmm.
They're concerned that the ability to engage with complex arguments, to really analyze information, to develop empathy through stories, all of that might diminish.
So it's a trade-off. We might gain new abilities, but potentially lose some of the cognitive skills that we've honed over centuries through reading.
It's a possibility, yeah. We
Yeah.
need to think about it. But it's not inevitable. If we understand how our brains work, how they adapt, we can make choices about how we engage with information, with technology.
Right.
We can cultivate habits that support both the skills we need to, thrive in this digital age and the skills that have always been essential for human connection and understanding.
It's a fascinating landscape, so complex and always changing. But it seems like ultimately we have more control than we might think. We have the power to choose how we engage with information, how we shape our brains, and how we prepare ourselves and, future generations for what's ahead. It's amazing to think we really can shape our own brains. We've been talking about, what we might gain or lose in this digital age, but is it really like one or the other?
Not necessarily. I think we can be good at both, like being digitally savvy and still being able to, read deeply and focus. In fact, those abilities might actually work together in the future.
So someone who can process information online quickly could also use that skill to, I don't know, to go through research and really dive into complex topics.
Exactly. Imagine researchers who can, scan huge databases super fast, but they also have that focus and critical thinking to analyze it all in depth. That would be powerful.
It's like having a mental toolbox, right? Equipped for both the fast digital world and the world of deep thinking.
Yeah, I like that. And just like any tool, it takes practice and skill to use them well. That's why it's so important to be aware of how we use information and technology.
So it's not just about, taking in whatever pops up on our screens, but choosing what we read, how we read it, and how we connect that to our understanding of the world.
Exactly. And it's about building those habits early, encouraging kids to, love reading and be good with technology. That could be key to them having that flexibility they'll need in the future.
It's giving them that foundation for learning their whole lives, a love for exploring ideas, a curiosity that goes beyond the screen.
And that's a powerful thing to pass on. It's about a generation that can not only, navigate this digital world, but actually contribute to it in meaningful ways.
So what can we do then as individuals, as a society, to promote this balance?
Well, we can start by recognizing the value of both deep reading and digital literacy. Encourage kids to explore both, to develop critical thinking alongside their tech skills. And we can model those habits ourselves, show them that learning keeps going beyond school into the world around us.
That's a great point. We can all be like ambassadors for reading, for the importance of thinking deeply, because that's how we understand ourselves and the world. Right?
Yeah. And who knows, maybe in the future, we'll see deep reading come back in a big way, not to replace digital stuff, but to go along with it.
I like that. A world where technology actually helps us learn better, connect, and explore ideas in really profound ways.
A world where we get the best of both, empowering ourselves and future generations to be, digitally fluent and deeply thoughtful.
That's a perfect way to wrap this up. We've talked about so much today. The connections between reading, our brains, and how we take in information, it's amazing.
It's complex. It's always changing. But one thing's for sure. We have more power than we realize to shape our own minds.
So to everyone listening, keep those pages turning, keep those brains buzzing, and keep diving deep into that world of knowledge and discovery.
Until next time.
That's it for the deep dive. Thanks for joining us.